Thanks, Monica. Thanks for the opportunity to be here and to move forward with a discussion of where we are now versus where we are when I had the chance to speak to all of you about 2 years ago. There's been an enormous amount of change, and as Monica said, the change, I think, has been overall in a very, very positive direction. She outlined in her first slide the goals of the IOM report, but what I would like to really make a remark about first is that was an incredibly important report because it synthesized not only the recommendations that were developed over a series of meetings and workshops, but also it summarized the activities of several previous committees that had made many recommendations about how the NCI's clinical trial system should change. And in fact, as I was talking this morning, if you go back, in truth, we started this process actually in 1997, 1998. With a committee that the NCI chartered, was headed by Jim Armitage of the University of Nebraska, and many in the room actually participated in that meeting. And so this has been a long process, but it has been one I think that has been very worthwhile in terms of the degree of change that has occurred. So let me just take a minute to say that this has not been an effort that has gone on just as a top-down effort. In fact, there's been an enormous amount of input from essentially every community of investigators, the community of patients, the community of academic centers and sites, the community of NCI-supported grantees and cooperative groups, all trying to look at these complex systems and look at the recommendations made by the individuals who have worked in those systems to try to make that the activity of doing clinical trials for our cancer patients more effective, more efficient. It's interesting that the last time that I spoke to you, this was actually in January of 2011. This was our system. We had 10 organizations that conducted phase 3 trials. They each had their own particular perspectives on how those trials were done, the separate statistical and operational support mechanisms, and then separate, in many ways, groups of physicians and scientists who supported the accrual to those studies. And so if you think about that here we are in February of 2013, and think about where we are, I think that the extent of change is, and I'm totally biased, is really quite remarkable. And I'm biased not necessarily because it's something that the NCI has done, but it is something that degree of change that has involved this enormous community working together that's been able to do these things. So I always like to start with this slide because if something happens and there's an earthquake, everything that's on that you need to know is on this slide, right? And we actually did have an earthquake in Washington not so very long ago. But the fact is that these are listed on the left are the major changes that have occurred. We have, in fact, in February 2013, a new clinical trials network program with 4 adult and 1 pediatric groups. We have a system that will, in a few months, conduct peer review focused not only on the research activities, but also collaboration and the operational efficiency of the members of the network. We have developed specific support for integral molecular correlative studies and screening in those trials. We have tried to put together a way in this new system for translational science to be supported, and also for the cooperating academic sites to integrate all of their activities across the network under one funding mechanism. We have a unified core facility we hope to be able to fund that will support imaging and radiation therapy trials. We have a system that you'll hear about in a whole system session on strategic planning and trial prioritization, really at not only an individual group level, but at a national level. I think you'll see, and I hope you'll agree, made major changes in how we improve and do review at the human subjects level for patients across this entire system. What I'm not going to be able to talk about, but what I think is extremely important, it was addressed in the IOM report, is a recent effort that's almost come to fruition to completely redo the template consent form document that the network will utilize, an effort that took the better part of 2 years, involved stakeholders across the government, FDA, OHRP, et cetera, to try to condense what we need to do and make viable the consent process in the era of biomarkers and the need for tissues. You'll see that one of the, I think, the most remarkable efforts has been the implementation of a uniform clinical trials data management system across this network with 3,000 sites. And I think that everyone in this room and everyone who has participated in this really quite difficult process should be enormously proud of this system, because in fact there is no country, there is no set of countries, and there is no pharmaceutical organization that has a uniform clinical trials data management system that unites this many particular sites. And we have a way to enroll our patients 24/7. So let me then focus on the first, actually the second recommendation of the first goal, that is, how do we continue to improve the speed and efficiency of our trials? I'm going to talk a little bit about the Cancer Clinical Trial Support Unit. I'm going to talk about the timelines that were implemented to try to improve the activation of our studies, and I'm going to talk about the implementation of our IT data management system, which is now, as of 2013, active, and all trials will utilize this system going forward. So what about the CTSU? Now, those of you who participated in some of the initial discussions of how to reform the NCI's clinical trial system, remember that this was a recommendation that actually came about 15 years ago. It took about 4 or 5 years to initiate, and now is a very active part of how we provide core support for registration for patients around the country, and actually in multiple countries outside the United States, how we help sites do auditing, answer questions, help with accrual reimbursement, and help educate patients and participants in the trials that are available across all of the NCI supported system. I think this is a very important activity, provides core support, and is something that will continue to provide a rock bed of core activities that assist this network overall. Let me talk a little bit about operational efficiency. This is something that took a separate group of individuals. Actually, there were over 60 individuals from the cooperative groups, from cancer centers, who participated in a 2-year effort to try to come up with ways to improve the activation times of our studies. As you can see in blue, as of 2006, 2008, we had these enormously long timelines over 2 years to open a phase 3 trial, the better part of 2 years to open a phase 1/2 trial. And through the work of this operational efficiency working group, we came up with not only guidelines and specific targets for phase 3 activation and phase 1/2 activation, but also absolute cutoffs for those time. This effort, as you'll see, has been quite successful. Successful enough, actually, for us to actually change the goalposts. We started out with a 2-year timeline for phase 3 trials. It's now been cut back to 540 days. We started out with approximately that same amount of time, over 500 days, 550 days, something like that for phase 2 trials. It's now 1.5 years. I suspect because of the incredible performance of all of the participants in this activity, we will be able to change those goalposts again. And this is to give you some idea of where improvements have come and where we need to make further improvements. These are comparisons of our activation times for early phase studies, not just phase 2 studies in the groups, but also our phase 1 and phase 2 networks. What you see is that we've made improvements in terms of the time it takes from the letter of intent submission to the approval of the letter of intent. We've stayed on target for the writing of the protocol. Many people think that it's been the lack of timeliness for protocol development that's been a problem. That's really not been the problem. The problem for phase 1 trials, phase 2 trials, has been actually getting IRB approval and getting approval from companies to actually supply the drug and permit us to move these trials along. That is the area that continues to lag. As you'll see in a minute, there's no question that that will be improved when I show you over the next reporting period based on the changes that have occurred with the central IRB, because going forward, our early phase program will now be covered by a national full-service IRB that will, I think, cut at least a month or more off of this timeline. We continue to have to do better in terms of dealing with our interactions with pharma and getting approvals for trials in early phase trials in a timely manner. Here's actually a Kaplan-Meier plot. Of course, this one is the opposite of what you usually see, right? In this one, you want to be on the lower curve, not the upper curve, right? Because this is the historical timeline for early phase trials. Remarkable. 2 years for some early phase trials. How could they be early if it takes 2 years to open the study, right? I mean, they're already late before they get started. This shows the current, and the reason there's this precipitous change, that's the absolute cutoff for our trials. We've improved by about 30%. The median has improved by about 30%. But we have to get these trials open in about 6 to 7 months to be appropriately timed for what our industry partners expect. This is a much better looking curve. This is the curve that I would like to see similar to this, something similar to this for our early phase studies. But in fact, we've improved the timeline for phase 3 trials by 50%. And we are very close indeed at the 50% line to our 300-day timeline. I think this is a testament to all of the members of the Clinical Trials Network, whether there are group members, statistical offices, administrative offices, CTEP, et cetera. This could not have happened without, and I'm not going to enumerate, but there have been enormous process changes in every aspect of the way we develop phase 3 trials to allow this change to have occurred. It's really, I think, quite remarkable, and we hope to never be able to see something in which 20% of our trials are out 800,000 days or more. That won't happen in the future. What's the second really, I think, critically important point? Some of the initial bullets I don't have to go over because the need to have a centralized common system for remote data capture and for data management was obvious. It was obvious 10 years ago, 15 years ago. It may be that the IT available at that time wasn't sufficient, maybe not, but it was a major effort to, number one, come up with the requirements for the system as a whole, and then to develop a way to provide the resources to obtain the software to utilize this system. That has happened, and I'm happy to say that every trial opened in 2013 will be opened utilizing the Metadata Rave software. I think that going forward, this is an enormous advantage because this is industry-grade software. We can collect whatever level of data we require, whether it's for a study, a phase 2 trial, or a larger study. This software is, as we speak, being adapted so that we can collect the genomic information that will be a part and parcel of clinical trials going forward. I think it has been, and I don't want to underemphasize just how much work it has taken for all of the partners in this process to adapt to the use of this software. It is harder to use up front. It is easier to use for the analysis, and most importantly, at every site, this will be the software not only for cooperative group trials, but for our phase 1 networks, our bone marrow transplant networks, everything that NCI supports going forward where we use this, have the same, hopefully, look and feel. A big change. Third important point with respect to speed and efficiency, and I'm going to focus on activities related to the central IRB. There are other issues that are very important, particularly those related to obtaining CDRH approval for IDEs in our genomic testing, but I think that it's very important to address this issue, which actually is a first for the NIH. This gives you the current model, the model as of the end of 2012, a facilitated review. And what it shows is that, yes, we had a fairly significant uptick of use of this model by many institutions. 2/3 of our cancer centers utilized this. Many of our CCOPs, et cetera, utilized this activity. A lot of trials were evaluated, but not all institutions, for many reasons, availed themselves of the use of this activity, number one. And part of the reason they didn't was because of this graph. What you see is that a completely unacceptable timeline in 2008 and 2009. If the idea is to have a central IRB to facilitate the activation of studies, to cut down on people's work, it can't take 4 months to approve a clinical trial. And again, with great appreciation to all of the individuals who participated in doing this, and there are many in this room and others, I think it is a significant achievement to have moved from 126 days to 3 weeks for the activation of clinical trials. I don't think there is, and I could be proven wrong, but I don't think that there is an NCI-supported cancer center in the United States that has an average time for all of its trials, its phase 3 trials, of 3 weeks or less in terms of approving the clinical trials in that time frame. But we weren't really satisfied with that model, because what we heard from our cancer center directors was that what we really need was to have a model, not a facilitated review, but of an IRB system in which the NCI-supported IRB used an independent model, took full responsibility for all of the studies, all of the amendments, and all of the activities, so that an institution, whether it's big or small, did not need to open a study just to have the study open if they had no patients, but rather could wait until that rare patient with a melanoma of the uvea or some other rare disease comes to the clinic, and then have the ability to open a study in a day or 2. And this has been made possible by the full accreditation by AHARP of the NCI as a central independent model. As many of you know in the audience, the current RFA for the new NCI Clinical Trials Network requires the usage of this independent full freight central IRB unless the particular institution can show that it can beat or is either equivalent or can beat the timelines for the central IRB. And this is a model that is going to be utilized for all of NCI's networks going forward. I think we'll have a very efficient system. I think it will take further time off the activation timelines. And I think that more importantly, it will decrease a lot of needless busy work that is entitled by having hundreds of institutions re-review the same protocols. And I think this is, again, something that has taken the participation of many of the individuals in this audience to pull off. Let's move to recommendation 4, because this is also a very important issue. Part of the timeline issue has to do with the ability or lack thereof of getting CRADAs and getting contracts approved at individual institutions. We've tried many things to try to improve this. Some have been successful. Some have been successful more than others. We have developed, and I'll start at the bottom, basically, just as we used for the trial activation, absolute timelines for our CRADA negotiations with pharma. These used to average a year to 15 months. We basically took the tack about a year ago now to say, if you want to work with the NCI, we do a lot of work for you. We perform many trials that you only provide us with compound. If you really want to work with us, you'll get a CRADA done in 6 months. We've lost essentially no trials by instituting that kind of important cutoff. We completely revised our IP language in our CRADAs after working with many different companies to try to avoid the issue of blocking IP, so that we insist that royalty-free and non-exclusive licenses be possible in the negotiations for the use of molecules, so that we can do investigational combinations and a variety of other kinds of studies that were simply not possible. We also, I think, trying to harmonize this process, spent a significant amount of effort in revising the official guidelines for our SPORE program, our Cancer Centers program, as well as, you know, for the group program, so as to cross-incentivize individuals who are principal investigators in each of those funding mechanisms for their participation in the others programs. They are official part of the review guidelines, and really to try to optimize the interactions amongst investigators participating in a variety of different funding vehicles. Let's talk about innovative science. That was one of the most important areas discussed by the IOM and the IOM report. This is, I think, really critical to doing the kinds of studies that we want to do going forward. We were very fortunate at the end of last year to have resources to do something that Dr. Comas and others for many years have stimulated us to try to facilitate, and that is to develop a uniform IT infrastructure to know where all of the clinical trials tissue samples are that were developed and have been developed for many years across the clinical trials, the NCI Clinical Trials Network. That is in process. I think this will be an incredibly important activity going forward. We, about 4 years ago now, developed what is lovingly, though incomprehensibly, known as the Bisquick Program. I don't know how you get Bisquick out of BIQ SFP, but that's what we call it. And this is a mechanism to try to provide quality of life, integral biomarker, and imaging funding that is associated with our large phase 3 and randomized phase 2 trials, and it's money that does not require the separate application for R01 or P01 funding. We have allocated and committed almost $31 million and have funded about 30% of the activities that have come forward in this area. I think this is very important. If one of the many things that I would do if I could, if we had the resources, in essence would be to double or triple these resources, because that's the kind of funding that our groups need for the kinds of science that they need going forward. Just to give you an example, there have been many, many kinds of trials. All of the that have received this kind of funding, all of the groups have participated. There have been classic biomarker studies. There have been imaging trials that have been essential. There have been quality of life trials that could not have been done because the funding was simply not there to allow these kinds of investigations to go forward. We've also worked with our early phase investigators. Here are some publications in terms of clinical trials design that have come out from the Investigational Drug Steering Committee. Perhaps more importantly, however, which I don't have time to go over in detail, really is the complete redo of our phase 1 and 2 program. Many of you perhaps know about this, some don't. We spent over 2 years redoing the early phase program, rebuilding that into into a network that is team science based, that has a substantially more core resource and the provision of core services for the entire network by the NCI. And I think perhaps most importantly, we'll add, even though we will likely have fewer sites, each site that is funded for this RFA that was actually, when I hit the street on Friday, will have more resources to allow the investigators in the early phase sphere to interact with laboratory facilities funded by SPOREs or cancer centers to do innovative preclinical work and to basically cross-fertilize all of these programs and to take advantage of the ways that we support correlative science by giving the investigators in this activity a way to fund those kinds of investigations. Let me then just turn, because my time is limited, to a few points and come to the conclusion. One of the most important things that we'll discuss during this meeting is how do we prioritize clinical trials given the limited resources that we have. And we began to rethink this process and try to bring a much larger range of extramural input into the process several years ago when we started the Clinical Trials and Translational Research Advisory Committee. That's been a very positive, in my view, activity. We have had investigators from the entire range of of our clinical trials and translational research communities who understand and provide input to us in terms of what the priority types of investigations ought to be. I'm very fortunate that Dr. Diazio is here to talk about the latest implementation of what we call the CTAC Strategic Planning Working Group, which is a working group that has met twice now, that actually was called for in the IOM report and has been something that has been of major importance to me, a way to fundamentally and finally take a group of experts from the cooperative groups, from our cancer centers, from the advocacy communities, from our clinical and translational research communities, and look at our entire portfolio and really help us understand in a non-pejorative way, what are we doing, what could we do better, and how should we go about making it better. This is really one of the most fundamentally important things that I think we've undertaken. I think you'll be very interested in what Bob has to say. It's a process that's just gotten started, but I think is absolutely necessary in the context of the limited budgets that we have going forward. So, as a few of you know in the audience, perhaps more than a few, these are the RFAs that came out last July. We had an outstanding response to those RFAs. I'm not at liberty to tell you how many people responded to which, but I think it's probably safe to say that at least I can tell you that we did in fact get 5 applications for cooperative group coordinating centers and statistical centers. It's probably not an enormous surprise. This is one of my favorite slides because we're almost at the end of this process from my perspective, right? Although Dr. Kern actually walked in on his own power, and Dr. Bertinelli is here, but I think still tired. Dr. Comas is here but sitting, but walked in. I saw Peter Adamson walk in the door, right? You all made it. I'm really appreciative of the fact that you did, and that all of the PIs and to those representing academic institutions, and there were very many of you who responded to that RFA for both for the translational science sites and for the institutional organizational applications. You all responded. We look very much forward to the review of those applications and actually the going to the NCAB this coming October for funding for the new system. Let me just end by a slide I actually showed 2 years ago in terms of a vision for what we're all looking forward to. We're looking forward to having an essential infrastructure that's not just for treatment, it's not just for screening or diagnosis, but it's for control and prevention and a way to support all of NCI's clinical trials activities. We're looking for a system that can launch trials rapidly and finish trials in a timely manner. We are interested in having, and I think we've made an enormous progress toward achieving, harmonized processes that facilitate the application of these trials, not just in our academic medical centers, but at sites, many, many sites around the country, because it's really true that if we can't activate clinical trials in the clinical practice community, it's unlikely that we will be able to complete our trials in a timely manner. And finally, I hope that we will have, when we end this activity and fund our new system, a very functional platform that allows us to look for the patients who we will need to screen for the molecular trials that are the trials of the future. So thank you very much. I really appreciate, number one, you're listening to me, number two, and most importantly, the help of everybody in this audience who has participated in making all of these changes happen. Thank you.